In a world obsessed with connection, the Sigma male stands apart not by accident, but by design. This exploration into Sigma psychology reveals why these independent, self-sufficient men often find themselves walking alone. If you've ever wondered why true Sigmas seem to have fewer people in their lives, despite their undeniable presence, this deep dive will illuminate the hidden dynamics at play. By the end of this journey, you'll understand that solitude for the Sigma isn't a failure. It's a strategic choice that powers their unique path through life. If you value unfiltered truth about male psychology that mainstream channels won't discuss, hit that subscribe button now to join our growing community of free thinkers challenging conventional wisdom. Strategic solitude, the Sigma male's solitude, isn't accidental, it's strategic. Unlike what society often misperceives, being alone isn't the Sigma's punishment, but his preference. This calculated isolation serves as both shield and sword in a world that drains energy from the independent-minded. Most men fear being alone. They fill their lives with constant social connection, equating popularity with success. The Sigma recognizes this as a fundamental misunderstanding of power dynamics. For him, solitude isn't emptiness, but fullness, a state where clarity emerges and authentic strength develops. Consider the case of James, a 32-year-old software architect who deliberately lives in a cabin outside the city. While his colleagues maintain extensive social networks, James limits his inner circle to 3 people. Each relationship is an energy exchange, he explains. Most people drain you with their needs and expectations. I'm selective about who gets access to my mental space. The Sigma understands what others don't. Quality over quantity applies to human connections. By implementing strategic solitude, he creates the mental bandwidth to pursue his vision, uncompromised by others' expectations. He builds relationships on his terms, rather than from a position of social desperation. This solitude also serves as a filter. Those who respect the Sigma's boundaries and still want connection are typically higher-value individuals who appreciate independence. The weak, needy, and manipulative are naturally repelled by someone who doesn't need their validation. Strategic. Solitude also enables the Sigma to develop his internal compass without interference. Without the constant noise of others' opinions, he becomes attuned to his authentic desires rather than society's programming. This is why Sigmas often make unconventional, yet personally fulfilling life choices that baffle others. The Sigmas. Alone time isn't spent in misery, but in deliberate self-development. While others distract themselves from existential discomfort through constant socialization, the Sigma confronts himself in silence. This creates a man who knows himself deeply, a rare quality that paradoxically makes him more compelling to others, even as he requires them less. Even when around others, the Sigma maintains psychological distance. He may be physically present while keeping his core self protected. This isn't deception, but preservation of his most valuable asset, his independent mind. The Sigma values meaningful connection, but refuses to pay for it with his authenticity. He won't perform social rituals that feel hollow, engage in small talk that waste time, or maintain relationships that don't serve his growth. This principled stance inevitably means fewer people in his life, but those who remain are there for the right reasons. The perceived threat of independence. The Sigma male's independence creates an unintentional barrier between him and potential connections. His self-sufficiency is often perceived as a threat rather than a virtue by those accustomed to relationships built on mutual dependency. Most social structures operate on subtle power dynamics where emotional neediness creates leverage. When someone doesn't need approval, validation, or constant reassurance, It disrupts these established patterns. The Sigma's emotional self-reliance removes the primary tool others use to influence behavior, the threat of withdrawal. Take Marcus, a self-employed consultant who maintains a small client list by choice. When I attend industry events, people often misread my self-containment as arrogance, he explains. What they're really detecting is that I don't need anything from them. This makes some people immediately defensive, while others become unusually eager to gain my approval. This independence triggers insecurity in others who subconsciously question their own neediness when confronted with someone who functions perfectly well alone. Many people's self-worth is tied to being needed, and the Sigma unintentionally challenges this foundation. Social groups often enforce conformity through the implied threat of exclusion. The Sigma's comfort with potential isolation neutralizes this threat, undermining the group's control mechanism. This makes him unpredictable by conventional social standards and therefore potentially dangerous to established hierarchies. In romantic relationships, the Sigma's independence is frequently misinterpreted as emotional unavailability or lack of investment. Partners accustomed to validation through dependency struggle with a man who loves by choice rather than need. This perceived emotional threat drives away those seeking traditional relationship dynamics where neediness is mistaken for devotion. The Sigma's habit of making decisions based on internal values rather than social pressure appears as unpredictability. To others, humans fear what they cannot predict, and the Sigma's independence makes his behavior difficult to anticipate using conventional social algorithms. Authority figures are particularly threatened by the Sigma's independence. Teachers, managers, and others in positions of power often rely on the fear of disapproval to maintain control. When faced with someone immune to this leverage, they typically respond with hostility rather than respect. The most threatening aspect of the Sigma's independence is its contagious nature. His example demonstrates an alternative to the need-based relationships many people maintain, potentially inspiring others to question their own dependency patterns. This makes him a silent revolutionary simply by existing authentically. This perceived threat explains why Sigmas often find themselves excluded from groups despite having valuable skills or insights to contribute. The group unconsciously protects itself from the Sigma's independence by rejecting him before his example can influence others. Value systems that contradict social norms. The Sigma male operates according to an internal value system that frequently contradicts mainstream social programming. This fundamental disconnect creates natural separation between him and those who uncritically accept conventional wisdom, while most people outsource their morality to external authorities, religion, government, or social consensus. The Sigma develops his ethics through critical thinking and personal experience. This self-derived value system rarely aligns perfectly with any mainstream ideology, making him an outsider in nearly every social group. Consider Eric, a former corporate executive who walked away from a six-figure salary to start a small, sustainable business. My colleagues couldn't comprehend why I'd throw away my career, he recalls. They measured success in status and money, while I valued autonomy and alignment with my principles. We were speaking different languages. The Sigma prioritizes authenticity over social acceptance, a radical position in a world where most people compromise their values for belonging. This unwillingness to perform social theater for approval creates natural distance from those who shapeshift to fit each social context. Most social circles maintain cohesion through shared delusions, collective agreements to ignore uncomfortable truths for the sake of harmony. The Sigma's commitment to reality as he perceives it makes him a natural disruptor of these comforting fictions, earning him the label of negative or difficult when he's simply being honest. The Sigma's valuation of time creates another disconnect. He views time as his most precious, non-renewable resource and allocates it accordingly. This often means declining social obligations others consider mandatory, creating the perception that he's aloof or antisocial when he's simply being intentional with his life energy. Unlike most men who measure themselves against external metrics, wealth compared to peers, sexual conquest numbers, or professional status, the Sigma evaluates himself against his own potential. This internal scorekeeping makes him immune to many social manipulation tactics that rely on triggering status, anxiety, or fear of missing out. The Sigma's tendency to value substance over appearance puts him at odds with image-conscious social environments. While others invest heavily in creating favorable impressions, the Sigma focuses on developing actual capability, creating a fundamental values misalignment that's immediately felt if rarely articulated. Perhaps most significantly, the Sigma values freedom above comfort, security, and even happiness, a hierarchy that baffles most people who willingly trade liberty for safety or convenience. This fundamental priority difference means the Sigma makes life choices that appear unnecessarily difficult or risky to the conventional mind. This values dissonance ensures the Sigma remains an outsider in most social contexts, not because he's incapable of connection, but because authentic connection requires some degree of shared values. When your core principles fundamentally differ from those around you, meaningful relationships become exponentially more difficult to establish and maintain. The unwillingness to compromise. Core principles. The Sigma male operates according to an unshakable set of personal principles that govern his every decision. Unlike the social chameleon, who adapts his values to fit each environment, the Sigma maintains his core convictions regardless of the social cost. This principled rigidity creates natural distance between the Sigma and potential connections who expect the normal give and take of social compromise. Where others bend to maintain harmony, the Sigma holds firm on matters he considers fundamental to his identity and purpose. Take the case of Daniel, a talented programmer who left 3 consecutive positions when asked to implement features he considered privacy violations. Each time colleagues told me to just do it because everyone else did, he explains. They couldn't understand that my principles aren't negotiable, even for career advancement or team acceptance. The Sigma distinguishes between preferences, which he can compromise on, and principles, which he cannot. This nuanced position is often misinterpreted as stubbornness or inflexibility by those who haven't developed a similar internal hierarchy of values. The Sigma appears unreasonable precisely because he reasons from first principles rather than social convenience. In romantic relationships, this unwillingness to compromise core values becomes particularly divisive. While adaptation and compromise are necessary in any relationship, the Sigma draws clear boundaries around his non-negotiables. Potential partners who expect the conventional pattern of mutual compromise on all fronts inevitably clash with this principled stance. The Sigma's principles often extend to how he spends his time and energy. He refuses pointless meetings, declines invitations to events that don't align with his priorities, and exits situations that violate his values, all behaviors that create friction in professional and social contexts where going along to get along is the expected norm. This principled position extends to the Sigma's speech. He won't participate in conversations he finds meaningless, pretend to agree with positions he finds false, or validate behaviors he considers destructive. even when social harmony depends on such white lies. This verbal integrity creates immediate tension in environments built on comfortable fictions. The Sigma's principles. First approach applies equally to small and large matters. He might refuse workplace cake celebrations, not out of antisocial tendency, but from commitment to his health. Values. This consistency, applied to even minor situations, makes daily interaction with the Sigma challenging for those accustomed to social flexibility. Perhaps most alienating is the Sigma's refusal to compromise his authenticity for social acceptance. Where others present different versions of themselves in different contexts, the Sigma remains fundamentally the same person regardless of audience. This consistency feels like rigidity to those who practice social shape-shifting as their primary connection strategy. This unwillingness to compromise core principles isn't born from arrogance, but from a deeply considered value system. The Sigma has typically spent significant time developing his principles through experience and reflection. Having paid this high price for his convictions, he values them above the temporary comfort of easy social connection. The shadow of intensity. The Sigma male's natural intensity creates an invisible barrier between him and casual connections. This intensity, in focus, in thought, in purpose, often overwhelms those accustomed to more diluted forms of existence. Most social interactions operate on a deliberately superficial level. Small talk, shared activities, and common interests create comfortable, low-stakes connections. The Sigma's intensity disrupts this safe dynamic, introducing a depth and seriousness that many find unsettling rather than engaging. Consider Alexander, a philosophy professor whose colleagues avoid him at faculty gatherings. "I don't understand meaningless conversation," he admits. "When someone asks my opinion, I give my actual thoughts rather than pleasant platitudes." People claim to want authenticity, but recoil when they encounter it unfiltered. The Sigma's mental intensity manifests as a constant analytical process. Where others accept surface appearances, the Sigma instinctively looks for deeper patterns, questioning assumptions others take for granted. This habit of mind creates conversational friction even in casual settings when the Sigma unintentionally challenges comfortable illusions. Emotional intensity similarly separates the Sigma from potential connections. Though often mistaken as emotionless, the Sigma typically experiences emotions with unusual depth rather than breadth. Where others feel mild emotions across many relationships, the Sigma invests profound emotional energy in few connections, an intensity many find overwhelming rather than flattering. The Sigma's purposeful intensity further alienates him from those living less deliberate lives. His clear sense of mission and focused energy makes idle pastimes appear wasteful rather than relaxing. This mission-driven approach to life creates natural distance from those seeking companions for distraction or entertainment, rather than purpose. Even the Sigma's physical presence often projects intensity through focused attention, economical movement, and alert stillness. This composed intensity reads as intimidating to many who equate relaxation with connection, creating unconscious social distance before any words are exchanged. The Sigma's conversational intensity manifests in his preference for meaningful dialogue over social performance. Where others use conversation primarily for bonding through shared words, the Sigma uses it for exploration and precision. This fundamental difference in communication purpose creates natural disconnection even during seemingly normal exchanges. This intensity extends to the Sigma's expectations in relationships. He seeks depth over breadth, quality over quantity, and growth over comfort, standards many find exhausting rather than inspiring. The Sigma's natural demand for substance creates an environment too challenging for those seeking easier connections. Perhaps Most alienating is the Sigma's intensity of focus. His ability to concentrate deeply on matters of interest while filtering out distractions often reads as dismissiveness or arrogance to those who haven't developed similar mental discipline. This focused attention, one of the Sigma's greatest strengths, becomes a social liability in environments that prize dispersed awareness over concentrated thought. Misinterpretation of Sigma traits. The Sigma male's core characteristics are consistently misread by a society conditioned to understand only alpha dominance or beta compliance. This fundamental misinterpretation creates a communication barrier that prevents meaningful connection before it can begin. The Sigma's self-contained confidence is frequently misread as arrogance, unlike the Alpha's performative confidence that demands audience validation. The Sigma's quiet self-assurance needs no external confirmation. This subtle distinction is lost on many who mistake his lack of status anxiety for superiority complex. Consider Michael, an independent contractor who rarely speaks in group settings but delivers decisive insights when necessary. People assume I'm either insecure or arrogant based on my selective communication, he notes. They struggle to comprehend someone who speaks only when there's something worth saying. The Sigma's selective socialization is commonly misinterpreted as social awkwardness rather than deliberate curation. His calculated choices about when, where, and with whom to engage are misread as inability rather than preference, creating false assumptions about his social capabilities that preclude potential connections. His comfort with solitude is frequently pathologized in a society that equates constant socialization with mental health. The Sigma's preference for meaningful isolation over empty togetherness is misdiagnosed as depression, anxiety, or antisocial tendency rather than recognized as a valid relational strategy. The Sigma's autonomy in group settings is particularly prone to misinterpretation. His tendency to operate independently within collective environments is often perceived as undermining group cohesion rather than complementing it through self-direction. This misreading creates unnecessary friction in team dynamics. His authentic expression is frequently mistaken for calculated rudeness. The Sigma's habit of speaking his actual thoughts rather than socially expedient platitudes appears as intentional provocation to those who prize harmony over truth. This fundamental misalignment in communication purpose creates recurring conflicts. The Sigma's selective investment of energy appears as inconsistency to outside observers. His intense engagement with matters of value, contrasted with complete disengagement from activities he finds meaningless, creates a pattern others struggle to predict or understand, leading to accusations of unreliability or capriciousness. His resistance to unnecessary hierarchy is misinterpreted as problem with authority rather than problem with arbitrary authority. The Sigma respects earned leadership, but questions positional power without demonstration of value, a nuanced stance that hierarchical systems typically reduce to simple insubordination. Perhaps most damaging is the misinterpretation of the Sigma's emotional self-sufficiency as emotional unavailability. His ability to process emotions internally rather than requiring external validation or processing is misread as emotional repression or incapacity for intimacy, creating barriers in potential romantic connections before they can develop. Selective investment of energy. The Sigma male operates according to a carefully calculated energy economy. Unlike those who disperse their life force across numerous superficial connections, the Sigma invests selectively in experiences and relationships that provide meaningful return on investment. This strategic energy allocation necessarily limits the Sigma's social footprint. Where others maintain dozens of casual friendships, the Sigma typically cultivates few high-quality connections that justify his substantial emotional and mental investment. Consider Thomas, a successful novelist, who maintains just 3 close friendships despite opportunities for broader social connection. Each meaningful relationship requires genuine attention and care, he explains. I'd rather do justice to few relationships than perform inadequately across many. It's respect for the process, not misanthropy. The Sigma recognizes that attention is his most valuable currency. While others freely give this resource to anyone who demands it, the Sigma distributes his focus with intention, creating natural separation from those accustomed to receiving attention on demand, regardless of merit. This selective investment extends to the Sigma's professional life. He commits his best energy to projects aligned with his values and vision, while giving minimal effort to mandatory tasks he considers meaningless. This prioritization creates friction in environments where uniform enthusiasm across all activities is the expected norm. The Sigma's energy selectivity appears in his conversation patterns. He engages fully in meaningful exchanges while disengaging from empty talk, creating an uneven social presence that others find unpredictable rather than principled. This conversational inconsistency is actually perfect consistency applied to a value system prioritizing substance over form. This energy conservation strategy becomes particularly evident in the Sigma's approach to social media and digital communication. Where others feel compelled to maintain continuous online presence, the Sigma engages minimally or not at all, preserving his mental resources for direct experiences rather than virtual performance. The Sigma applies similar selectivity to his emotional investments. He experiences emotions deeply, but directs them purposefully rather than reactively. This emotional discipline often creates the impression of coldness when actually representing careful stewardship of emotional energy. A resource, the Sigma, refuses to squander on temporary or superficial triggers. This energy selectivity extends even to the Sigma's physical presence. He chooses environments that support rather than drain his energy, often avoiding crowded, noisy, or chaotic settings that others seek for stimulation. This environmental preference naturally limits his social intersection points with potential connections. Perhaps most significantly, the Sigma invests energy according to personal values rather than social expectation. He may dedicate substantial resources to pursuits others consider unimportant while ignoring socially validated activities. This misalignment between his energy allocation and social norms creates natural distance from those who expect conventional investment patterns. The freedom connection paradox. At the heart of the Sigma male's solitude lies a fundamental paradox: the inverse relationship between personal freedom and deep connection. This unavoidable tension forces difficult choices that typically resolve in favor of freedom, creating natural distance in the Sigma's relational landscape. Most human connections operate on mutual limitation, shared obligations, expectations, compromises, and adaptations that make collective experience possible. The Sigma's uncommon prioritization of personal freedom inevitably conflicts with these relationship requirements, creating a philosophical impasse rarely resolved through compromise. Consider Nathan, a digital nomad who maintains relationships primarily through sporadic deep conversations rather than consistent presence. Each commitment creates a claim on my future self, he observes. I've learned that most relationships demand predictability and routine I'm unwilling to provide, not because I don't value connection, but because I value freedom more. The Sigma recognizes what others often deny, that every meaningful relationship requires sacrifice of personal autonomy. Family bonds demand obligation, romantic partnerships require compromise, and even friendships impose expectations that limit individual freedom. The Sigma makes these trade-offs more consciously and selectively than most. This freedom-connection paradox manifests most visibly in the Sigma's romantic relationships. Where traditional relationships assume progressive entanglement of lives, finances, and futures, the Sigma maintains clear boundaries around his autonomy. This prized independence often frustrates partners seeking conventional relationship progression. The Sigma's commitment to freedom extends to intellectual autonomy. He reserves the right to change positions based on new evidence, explore controversial ideas, and question established wisdom. Intellectual freedoms, often constrained in close relationships where ideological alignment becomes an unspoken requirement. For continued harmony, this paradox appears in the Sigma's resistance to relationship labels and defined roles. He recognizes that each social classification carries implicit behavioral expectations that restrict freedom of action. This reluctance to accept conventional relationship frameworks creates confusion and insecurity in those seeking traditional relational structures. The Sigma's prioritization of freedom over connection extends to his living arrangements. He typically chooses environments that maximize autonomy, often living alone, in remote locations, or with minimal shared space. These physical choices naturally limit opportunities for the spontaneous interactions that often develop into deeper connections. The freedom-connection paradox influences even the Sigma's communication patterns. He resists obligation to respond immediately to messages, answer every call, or maintain continuous availability, communication expectations that most relationships eventually impose. This communication independence creates friction with those who equate accessibility with caring. Perhaps most fundamentally, the Sigma values freedom from external definition, the right to define himself rather than being defined by his relationships. This core autonomy directly conflicts with the natural human tendency to understand others through their relational contexts, creating a philosophical divide between the Sigma and potential connections before any practical issues arise. The Sigma male solitary path isn't a failure of connection, but a triumph of authenticity. Throughout this exploration, we've uncovered how strategic solitude, perceived threats of independence, contradictory value systems, unwillingness to compromise principles, intensity, misinterpretation of traits, selective energy investment, and the freedom-connection paradox all contribute to the Sigma's unique position in social dynamics. What appears as isolation to the outside world is often the Sigma's deliberate curation of his life experience. By maintaining this independence, he preserves the very qualities that make him exceptional: his unflinching authenticity, self-sufficiency, and freedom from social conditioning. If this deep analysis of Sigma psychology resonates with your experience or fascinates your mind, you're among those who seek truth beyond social pretense. Our channel exists to explore these hidden dimensions of male experience that mainstream sources either misunderstand or deliberately ignore. Subscribe now to join a community of independent thinkers who value substance over appearance and truth over comfort. The path of the Sigma may be walked alone, but knowing others understand your journey can make all the difference.